Welcome back to my channel, y'all. Today we're going to talk about talking. How to have a conversation. It's one of the things that I get the most requests for. How do I get through that awkwardness? How do I make that very first approach to somebody? What do I say? How do I keep a conversation going, right? Really difficult for a lot of people, for a lot of us. Let's get into it. Now, when we're thinking about talking, I want to break it down into two categories, right? I want to talk about listening and I want to talk about talking because they're very related to one another, but they are distinct abilities. So let's start with listening. Listening, we think of it just with our ears, right? We're hearing the words, but there's so much more to listening than simply hearing what somebody says. There's body language aspects, there's vocal tonality, there's the words they're saying, there's the word choice they're saying, there's other little nonverbal cues that you need to pick up on because those very often have a lot more importance than the actual words they are saying. So for example, if I were to say to you, do you want to have those apples? Okay? Very simple statement. But if I were instead to say, do you want to have those apples? Or, do you want to have those apples? Or, do you want to have those apples? Okay, those sentences, they're the exact same words, but they all carry very different implications from one another. And the only differences there were really my voice tone, and maybe a little bit in my body language. Now, if you're not paying attention to those things, if you're basically looking at listening as the same thing as reading words on a page, you're going to be missing out on a lot. So how do we train that? How do we learn the ability to read the nonverbal cues that people are saying when they are talking to us? That is a very big topic. In terms of body language, there are body language dictionaries out there. I have a chapter in the guide that talks about it. There is, in fact, the Ultimate Body Language Dictionary. I think that's what it is. I'll put a link to the books on that topic that I recommend inside of my description. There's also a body language quiz of sorts. If you go to howiereef.com/guide/resources, there's a bunch of different tools there that you can go through to train your body language reading abilities. But ultimately, you are going to need to develop an instinctive idea for this, an instinctive gut reaction to this person has this body language. I intuitively understand that they're feeling a little insecure. If they're like really closed off like this, that tends to mean that they're feeling a little uncomfortable and they're trying to literally defend their vital organs from you. If they're feeling very open, if they're feeling very projected outwards in their chest and they're smiling, they're probably doing pretty well. If they're shuffling their feet a little bit, they're probably a little bit anxious. There's many different cues that you can read, and every single one of these cues can color the way that you are listening to the conversation that you're having with them. It is a skill you need to practice, and in my opinion, the single best way to do it, short of actually going out and having conversations with people and trying to pay attention, is to go out people watching. Go to a bar, go to a public place, sit on a bench in a park or something like that, and just watch people interacting with one another. How are these people feeling toward one another? Are they in love? Are they hostile toward each other? Are they friends who are having a good time? You can notice these things and ask yourself, how do I know that they have this relationship and those are the feelings that they are feeling? You probably know because of their body language. So what about their body language is telling you that? Is it the way they are gesturing with their hands? Is it something in their facial expression? What is it? And write that down in a journal and actually become consciously aware of the things that you are observing and then keep track of them when you're having social interactions in your everyday life. You can practice a very similar thing in terms of vocal tonality, except instead of going out into a public place, perhaps watch movies. You watch a movie, you watch, say, Before Dawn, right? Great romantic movie, one of my favorites. You look at the way these characters are interacting with one another, what vocal tonality is indicating they are flirting, or annoyed, or friendly, or interested in one another, or whatever other emotion you want to observe. And if you really want to get into this, there is no better path to it than taking acting classes, because acting is literally learning how to express yourself in these nonverbal ways deliberately. I want to convey X emotion, so in order to do that, I need to express myself in a way given a certain amount of body language, right? Obviously, there's different approaches to acting. There's the method where you actually try to induce the emotion you want to convey in yourself and then project that in your body language. But even when you're learning the method, you probably still need to be consciously aware of what your body looks like, what your emotions are, what your gestures are expressing, because you might not be consciously aware of how your gestures are attached to the emotions that you are feeling and expressing. And learning to be a better actor will make you more aware of that, both in terms of how you can express it and how you observe it in other people. So that is the initial stages of nonverbal communication. In terms of other listening skills, simply remaining present when you are talking to somebody. And let's actually bridge the gap a little bit between listening and talking with a technique for continuing a conversation that I call threading. So threading goes something like this. You're having a conversation. Let's say you're talking to somebody and they say to you, I just visited my uncle in Missouri last weekend. Okay? In that sentence, there are 3 potential topics of conversation. There's the uncle, there's Missouri, and there's last weekend. These are the focal points, the centers of the sentence, the aspects of the sentence that are potential bridges to other topics of conversation. Now, maybe you want to talk more about the person's uncle. Maybe you want to learn more about Missouri. Or maybe there are other things that happened last weekend that you want to learn about. Generally speaking, what I suggest is you try and identify what the most emotionally relevant aspect of the sentence is. So chances are it's not going to be last weekend. It's probably going to be either Missouri or the uncle. Either you ask, that's cool that you were visiting your uncle. Are you guys close? You could say something like that. You could say, oh, I've always wanted to visit Missouri. What sorts of things did you get to do there? And then they can go off on that and describe more activities they've done. So one of those 2 things. But always be looking for the extra information that exists inside of a sentence. What are the possible topics of conversation that can be threaded off of these topics that have already been introduced in the sentence? And you can then always come back to previously introduced topics if a particular thread ever runs dry. So, you are listening for the important emotional content of any given sentence that the person you're talking to is saying to you. And then you are using that to inform your questions for them, how you want to learn more about them, how you want to connect with them. And as they share things, you can then share your own stories, your own feelings, your own connections to the information that they are sharing with you. And that is how we bond with one another. That is how we develop empathy and connection and friendship and love and everything associated with human interaction that we are pursuing this for in the first place, right? So, that's what you're going for. So let's talk a little bit about questions. There's a bad habit that a lot of people have when they are socially interacting with people of being a consumer of value. Now, when you go out and you're talking to somebody, generally speaking, so people really like talking about themselves, but they don't want to be the only source of any content in a conversation. Otherwise, especially when you're talking to an introvert, they're going to just feel drained and used. It's like, I'm providing all of the information and entertainment in this conversation, and all you're doing is saying, so, what do you do for a living? Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? What did you study? What are some of your hobbies? Do you have any pets? Right? This is the way small talk tends to go at networking events for professional stuff, and even at bars, people will do this, and it's because they want to have the conversation, they want to connect with this person, but they don't really know how to delve into anything more emotional and important, and how to share entertaining stuff of value with the person they're talking to. They just know how to make small talk conversations and interrogate them. So here's what I suggest. Ultimately, when you become really adept at having conversations with people, you'll be able to ask questions in emotionally relevant and intriguing ways. You always want to be asking questions that are open-ended and invite a lot of exploration. Questions like, so tell me something that you're really passionate about, or it seems like, well, so I'll tell you the technique right now. You go in and you start off by sharing some information, by sharing some value, especially about the person you are engaging with. I get the impression that you come from out of town. I get the impression you're from New York. Do I have it right? It doesn't even necessarily matter whether you're right or wrong. Okay, you want to be authentic. You don't want to like be throwing out some random pickup line that you share with everybody. You want to be sharing genuine observations and thoughts that have been inspired by the person you are talking with. But you want to start off by offering something that you are thinking or feeling or observing, and inviting the other person to respond to what you have just shared. So, sharing an observation about them, sharing an observation about the room that you're in, a shared experience that you are having, as opposed to just going up to them and saying, "So, you come here often? You celebrating being 21?" Like, you need to manufacture something then, and they are then providing all of the value, they are providing the facts, the information, the entertainment, and you are consuming it. Try to avoid that dynamic. Try to come in and say, "You guys seem like the coolest people in the bar. Can I hang out with you for a bit? So what brings you out tonight?" Okay? You have come in, you've complimented them, you've shared information and observations with them, you've increased the mood of the evening by joining them. You have already provided value. And that is essentially what this is all about. You are exchanging information and fun and jokes and increasing the level of joy and value, for lack of a better word, in the social interaction in doing so. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not you coming in, interrogating them, and absorbing their information. That is a zero-sum game. It's you coming in, sharing stuff that they share stuff that you like. That is how you connect and like each other and become friends. So, always be coming in with a positive attitude, always be coming in sharing additional information, and a quick hack to do that is those boring questions that you have, try turning them into statements. Instead of saying, "Where are you from?" you could say, "You seem like a Bostonian. You seem like you're from Florida." Do I have it right? Okay. That is how you transform instantly your question, your boring interrogation question, into an observation that has a bit more energy to it. Another really important part of conversation skills is how you be a good storyteller. So let's talk a bit about that. There's a few things to keep in mind when you're telling a good story. Okay, story has a sort of structure. So I split it up into the hook, the content, and the close. The hook is a sort of emotional impetus for telling the story, right? You're doing something to pull them in. You could say something like, "Hey guys, you ever been lost in the city? So the other day, I was walking through Boston." Okay? That's how you start it up. You are immediately relating the content of your story to the crowd that you're talking to. Otherwise, you're just saying, "Man, I had the worst day the other day," or "I had the greatest thing ever happen," right? You're speaking in superlatives. You are explaining to them why should they give a shit about the story you're about to tell. Because it's a superlative, it's a really awesome thing that happened, it's a really terrible thing that happened, it's a really exciting thing that happened, or it's relevant to them. It is something that you experienced that is probably similar to something they have experienced, and that can be an impetus for them to share a story. So that's the hook. You're starting out by bringing them into the story, showing how they are relevant to the story and why you want to share it. The content is perhaps the most difficult part, because a lot of people, when they're telling stories, think of the beats, so to speak, of the story one after another. This happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. Generally speaking, you don't want to be structuring your stories that way. The way I like to think of it is something I learned from Trey and Matt, the guys who created South Park. Every single beat in your story should be connected by a but or a therefore. Okay? I was going to the grocery store, but it was raining. So I had to go and get an umbrella, but the umbrella was broken. So I had to manufacture one. I made a plastic bag that I hung over my head, and I was walking around, but then I got stopped because there was a cat in my way, and the cat was soaking wet. All right, you see how this is going? Every single moment of the story pushes the rest of the story along. There are no unnecessary facts, things that are drawing the story longer than it absolutely needs to be. I am keeping every single thing relevant and moving forward in the narrative. Then lastly, there is the close. The close is sort of similar to the hook in that it is bringing it back to the crowd. It is bringing it back to be relevant to the people that you were talking to. Usually this takes the form of a moral of the story. So, for example, just like, fuck rain, okay? Rain is terrible, guys. It can be as simple as that. You are sharing an emotion with people that is universally held across the entire crowd. And that's all it needs to be. And then that concludes the story, and you can move on to the next topic of conversation. Another thing I want to mention concerning the content is you want your content to be as relatable and emotional and sensational as possible. And by sensational, I mean literally sensations. Think in terms of physical touch, smell, sounds, things like that. Remember, you are conveying an experience to the people that you are talking to. You aren't just conveying facts. Nobody cares about facts. This is a social experience. They want to experience what you have to say as if they were experiencing it themselves. You are creating a memory for them. So as you are describing your story, what you want to do is you want to focus, you want to describe it in terms of the things you were seeing, the things you were feeling, the smells you were experiencing, as much as you possibly can, and interweave that among the actual beats that you are telling them. So I'll give you guys an example. So we're approaching Halloween, right? And everybody is setting up their pumpkins, everybody's doing the baking and figuring out costumes and stuff. So my girlfriend and I, we picked out a couple pumpkins, and we turned them into jack-o'-lanterns. I had this one that was this cat. It was really cute. She made another cat, but her cat was like an actual cat. Mine was like a misshapen witch cat thing. Anyway, so we put some of those like little light-up things that you pound on them, and they light up, and it makes the pumpkin glow, and we even got a bunch of different colors. It was really pretty. So I'm at work the other day. It's COVID, so I'm working from home. All the lights in my house are off except the office right here with this light. And I step out and I notice my pumpkin's light is turned on. It's just glowing there ominously in my living room. And I'm like, oh shit, is this like haunted or something? I'm like kind of creeped out. So I get a little bit closer and the pumpkin's collapsed, all right? The whole thing has like started to rot and the top has fallen down and turned on the lights. I'm like, phew, all right. Finally, I guess not a problem. I gotta clean it up then. So I reach down, I open my front door to take it outside, I reach down, I pick up the pumpkin, the whole thing collapses in my arms, and this moldy pile of goo just splatters all over the floor. So I'm like, holy crap, this whole thing had been rotting so much more than I thought it did. I'm surprised it was able to stay as firm as it was for as many days as it did, because it was like a massive mess of mold. And then I go over to my girlfriend's pumpkin and I open it up and there's like white hair growing out of it. I'm like, oh shit, all right, this is worse than ghosts. This is something I gotta take care of right now. So I managed to get a garbage bag and scoop it up and like put on my COVID mask and try and prepare like biohazard stuff going on right here. And I lift it up, I managed to take it all outside and scrub it up, and my girlfriend comes home and is wondering like, why is everything all scattered about? Why is the floor all wet? Anyway, it's crazy, guys. Like just warning you, be careful with your pumpkins. They're kind of going bad a little bit faster than I expected. All right? So, not the best story in the world, right? It's basically a story of me cleaning up a disgusting pumpkin. But that's the structure. That's the emotions and the experiences that you are trying to convey and make your audience feel something. So I'd like to talk about one more thing, and that's flirting. What is the difference between ordinary conversation and flirting? So, there's a lot of different opinions on this, right? It's a widely debated topic. If you go to pickup artist circles, what they'll describe it as is flirting is the combination of breaking and re-establishing rapport. You say something that's a little bit edgy, something that challenges your relationship with this person, and then you follow it up with something that demonstrates you are still fond of them, you do still want to have a connection with them. And the idea is that you're playing this game of like, trying to establish yourself as higher status than they are, and then saying, oh, but I'm actually still interested in you. Okay? I do not recommend thinking of flirting in that way. In my opinion, flirting is something that exists entirely non-verbally. It is the non-verbal expression of wanting to have sex with someone. All right, that's all there is to it. And there's a lot of different ways we express that. Sometimes it's in teasing. Sometimes it's in doing some sort of little status-based challenge. Sometimes it's literally walking up to somebody and being like, you're the hottest person I've ever seen. Okay, you can say something like that, but usually it's pretty subtle. Okay? I could go up to somebody and I could say, that's a really nice pineapple. I could also say, that's a really nice pineapple. One of those is flirting. Not even necessarily anything sexual about pineapples, but the voice tone and the body language conveys a message, okay? And that's entirely where flirting lives, in my opinion. In terms of body language, it's just holding eye contact a little bit longer than you would with somebody you're not flirting with. It's finding excuses to touch each other. It's holding hands when you handshake just a little bit longer than you usually would. It's laughing at each other's jokes. It's feeling something inside of it. It's the desire to connect with somebody sexually, and then eventually, like, you can be perfectly blunt and say, like, I'm really attracted to you. Do you want to exchange numbers? Do you want to go get something to drink? You can do that, and that's often going to be a little bit forward. That may or may not go well, because part of the struggle we have here is the reason that flirting lives almost exclusively in the nonverbal realm is because we have a lot of toxic ideas about sexuality in our culture. And so that kind of has to be done on the DL. It needs to be subtle and plausibly deniable every time we want to engage in it at all, right? So, but that's where I would suggest focusing on your flirting skills. All flirting is keeping eye contact with the person that you're attracted to. And then once you start reading indications that they're interested as well, usually in their body language, like there's a lot of things. If you're looking for recommendations for signals that somebody is sexually interested in you, there's some sexually dimorphic things, like if somebody is stroking the stem of their wine glass, that is probably a signal that they are thinking about giving a hand job. If somebody is smoking a cigarette and they're holding their wrist out like this, that's usually a sign that they are attracted to the person they're holding it to. If somebody is putting most of their weight on one foot, the lighter foot is going to be pointing at the person they find most important or most attractive in the group of people they're talking to. Okay, there's a lot of subtle cues that you can look for like that and use that as an impetus to flirt with somebody and then ask for their number and ask them out. But most of this is subconscious. This is animalistic. Like, animals recognize that they're attracted to one another, and so do humans. It's interpreted in a very primal way. And that's the sort of communication you need to be engaging in. It is a primal, primitive communication, expressed mostly in body language, not primarily in words. And that's what you need to focus on and pay attention to, and that's what you need to engage in. So when you're interested in someone, when you're sexually attracted to them, you need to have the courage to behave accordingly and share that. And if you get rejected, you get rejected. That's all right. But express it in your voice tone, express it in your body language, and ask them on a date. And that's all there is to flirting. So I hope this helped you all out. Feel free to reach out to me on howiereith.com, and feel free to comment. Have a good one.